Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you having this important hearing addressing the concerns we all have about Dodd-Frank and what's the impacts it's having on our districts in the country. I was just making a few notes listening to the testimony of the witnesses and listening to the conversations from the other members. How many problems that Dodd-Frank has actually solved since it's been passed? And when I go back home to my districts every week and talk to my local community bankers, who are telling me that, you know, Stephen, Washington just doesn't get it because the people at the top are not being harmed as much as the folks at the bottom. They're the ones that can't get loans anymore because Dodd-Frank has made it impossible for the banks to be able to loan these guys money. Crushing banks through unnecessary regulation crushes the consumer. This is not about making community banks pay for something they had nothing to do with back a few years ago. And to reiterate something that Mr. Hurt said a few minutes ago, government was had a big hand in what happened with telling banks who to loan money to and who not to loan money to loan money to people that couldn't pay it back. They had a heavy hand in how all of this started and how all of this unfolded. And it's almost to the, I don't want to read too much into it, but some of the comments that the opponents or the proponents of Dodd-Frank make, it's almost like they want to do away with the community banking industry and all of the competition and just have one or two big banks run everything. And, you know, back home in our district, something that's the overall theme is, you know, big government is good for big business, but it does nothing to help the small guy. It crushes the small guy. And then you look at Dodd-Frank and how it's being carried out. Congress doesn't appropriate money. It gets its money from the Fed. We have very little when it comes to holding them accountable for what they're doing. They make the rules. They write the rules themselves. They regulate how they see fit with almost no oversight. Director Cordray, not a panel of people that actually make the decisions on what's happening and who's it affecting, but one guy. So, you know, what is wrong with trying to fix all of these unnecessary burdensome regulations that are hurting our constituents on both sides of the aisle? You know, we have a bill, a manufactured housing bill, something that was unintended in Dodd-Frank, that Mr. Frank, former member Barney Frank, former chairman Barney Frank addressed that it needed to be taken care of. Ranking Member Waters also just a few months ago signaled that we needed to fix this problem. But now it's become a very partisan issue. We can't touch it because it's part of Dodd-Frank. This is the problem. This is the problem. We need to do what we can to make sure we're working for our constituents, not more government and more burdensome regulation. Question, Mr. Maloney, would it be beneficial, and I know the answer, but I want to hear your feedback, if we allowed these rules and these regs to sunset a lot of it? So we could go back. We had a jobs bill last Congress, and it was dealing with the IPO process and Sarbanes-Oxley, and if some of that would have been allowed to sunset, we would not have had to do what we did to fix that problem. So comment, please.
I agree with that, and I recognize the pressure that any policymaker feels in a time of crisis to do something. I agree with Ms. Pierce that it's often the right thing not to give in to that pressure, but I understand the pressure. One way of reducing the cost would be to have automatic sunset provisions in legislation so that once things have cooled down, that we can go back and say, you know, what is it that actually needs to be done here? And I just, you know, want to make the observation that one of the things that Dodd-Frank clearly does is it increases the authority of the bank regulators over non-bank entities. Well, if you say, well, okay, so let's go back to roughly, say, 2006. What did the Fed know at the time? It could see that the default rate on subprime loans was rising. It could see that housing prices were beginning to fall in many areas of the country. Why didn't it do something at that point? Was it because there was no statute that said think about systemic risk? Or was it that the Fed, just like the banks that it regulates, figured the ultimate experience with losses here is going to look like it's always looked, and that's not going to be
My time's expired, but the answer is more government is not the answer. I yield back.